Okay, we're back at working on the suspension steering, and I wanted to share some info. This is an upgrade from a 6-cylinder Mustang to a V8, and so I did buy some used spindles for V8 Mustang or V8 Falcon. In fact, these did come off of a Falcon from the seller's description, but the casting numbers on them, I can't see from here, is exactly the same. It's like 5ACA or something. I don't remember the letters. And I bead blasted them, cleaned them up. They were pretty rusty, and they go for around 250 to 300 bucks nowadays for a used set. But it's pretty much the best solution as far as I'm concerned for making the V8 steering. And unless you go to a aftermarket tubular control arms, this is still a good solution. And other things that I've upgraded is I bought new lower control arms, new upper control arms. Those are bought off Amazon, which with the Amazon Prime gave me the best option for cost in terms of shipping being free. And I don't remember how much those were. Same thing with the springs, also purchased on Amazon. I cut off a quarter of turn off the bottom end because the top end is you can't cut from there because the spring is flattened out more, just to see how much it'll lower the car. I didn't want to go a whole half turn, half a coil, because it would be potentially too low depending on the tires I end up putting on here, which I want to do 17s, and I don't want small rubber sidewalls. But the 17s are because I need to clear these huge brakes, which are from also from a Mustang, but these are from 2005 to 2008 Mustang GT. There the casting says TRW on the other side. The caliper casting here says S197 GT. And these are like way bigger than the factory disc brakes that were an option for the 65, 66 Mustangs by Kelsey Hayes, which was the option I was considering. But this upgrade with the spindle, the hub, the caliper bracket, the rebuilt calipers, new pads, and the adapting kit, which is the red parts here, all came to under $400 from a person off of Craigslist. And well, it would cost more to ship if you had to make an arrangement with the fellow. He is located in Ontario, California, and I'll try to get some information, contact info, at the end of my video. But these brakes, I think, are about 13-inch. They're bigger than 12 and a half from what I could measure on the back side, but I don't remember precisely. I'll give you more details later. And these are just some adapters I had because I had some really high positive offset wheels on the car, just to move the car like that on the dollies until I locate it here in this location in my yard. So those are going to be gone. The hubs are cut down from another hub, I don't know where, in order to fit all these parts. And it's nicely machined. And this is an easily replaceable arrangement, whether you need to get new pads or a new rotor. This is a nice thick rotor. If you look down the inside of it, you can see that the vanes are straight. They're not slanted, because that's what determines how you should mount these, whether the cuts should go one way or another. But in this particular case, being straight, this is the recommended right side caliper, and this is the recommended left side caliper slot. And these are cross drilled, slotted, not too many holes, which is good. It gives it more strength, I think. And I expect these to do a fantastic job of braking, along with the discs that I have for the back, which are going to be on the rear end from a Explorer. stay tuned for another video to see how I cut down the rear end so that it's shorter and it fits underneath the Mustang. And finally, these are the original strut rods, as they call them, with brand new hardware underneath. Moog is the products that I bought. All of these are Moog parts for the lower and upper control arms and all the links and things. The anti-sway bar is one that was on the car, and it already has polyurethane bushings, although you can't see it very well. And then I think it's thicker than the stock bar, so I'm going to keep that and just put some polyurethane ends on them when it comes closer to sitting down on the ground. So now I'm going to go on and remove that 6-cylinder idler arm bracket because it doesn't work with the V8 stuff. I said I would find out whether it worked with it, and it doesn't, so I had to buy a separate idler arm. Also purchased off Amazon. I think that idler arm was around 45 bucks, but they can go upwards of 85 bucks if you don't shop carefully. So we're going to remove that and replace it first. Okay, so I have a wrench on this side. And we're going to power it off on this side. Tool fell off. Just reached over the fender with one hand and then powered it off with the other side. Here are all my goodies for the front end. This is the idler arm difference from the V8, that part number, and the original 6-cylinder one. There's my new Pitman arm. And then we got new center link for the V8. Came with the Borgeson steering. Okay, so these are the parts as recommended by other people online on Amazon, because some of the parts that list for the Mustang 66 don't quite work. So these are the link pieces for the steering, and this is the idler arm. At this point, it's good to note these two bolts that are fine thread are for the idler arm, and these ones that had the coarse thread were from the steering box. Otherwise, they look pretty identical. The torque specification for this is 55 foot-pounds. It's a 7/8 nut. I've already adjusted my torque wrench. Only way to get that much torque is to have it bolted to the frame. There we are, like new. Okay, I've installed the other end of this just loosely, and then there's a rubber grommet that goes next on the power steering unit. And then I did the crossbar, crosslink, so I could see approximately where this should line up, which is right there. There we go. I'm going to fit the steering pieces before I tighten all the nuts. This center to center 6-cylinder length is 25.5 inches. And that matches this center to center. Again, I'm measuring from the inside of the bolt there, not from the center of the bolt. Problem is, these pivot points for the V8 steering are 18.5 inches. From there to there. Trust me, I did a more careful measurement. Yeah, 18.5. What this means is for my measurement for the outer link parts, I need to add 3.5 inches to what I measure on the 6-cylinder pieces. So from this outer part, so from this 25.5 inch part, the link is 11 inches center to center on the right, driver's side, left. On the right side, the passenger side, I don't have a match. This one is 10 inches center to center, which means that explains why the steering wheel was so off on the installation. So I'll probably have to do 10.5 inches on each side, plus 3.5 inches. Makes 14 inches for the length I'm looking for to get in the ballpark for the wheels to be going straight. So the long ones are the inner rods because they have clear things like the end of the center link. Now I just have to figure out which way these face, because this is a backwards thread, that's a forward thread, so that they can tighten together. At first glance you might think this is a solid blank, but I just taped over the hole so I wouldn't get paint in it. And so it stayed clean until I finally assembled it, because it's been months since I've painted these. Okay, according to the instructions online, but not with the packaging, this foam washer goes on next. And it makes sense to help seal the grease from coming out. And then there's two sizes of washer beside. A larger hole and a smaller hole. The smaller one fits perfectly there, but the larger one doesn't go down very far if I was to slip it underneath. I don't know if it's for a different size stud or what. The fact is, when this is in place and I put this on, this sits a little higher, maybe too high. And while it doesn't squash this, there's still plenty of room without that washer in place. There's plenty of room under here, maybe too much, but I think the castle nut will go down farther without that washer in place. All right, time to put the first arm on. I found it's easier to install the bottom first, or the outer first, and then you have some adjustment on that one, the inner. Now the steering wheel is straight and lined up perfectly, so I may need to do a small adjustment to this fit better. Yeah, this seems towed in just a little bit, but I'll measure it after. I did notice right away this particular side needed more turning in to get it to line up. And it still looks towed in, so I'm going to have to adjust it some more. It's pretty close to the end of its adjustment. Looks pretty good. And that's almost out of thread, or out of room for thread. I think I've heard of someone mentioning that they had to cut one of the shafts a little bit, but then I don't know how I would get more thread out of those. Now to tighten up all the other bolts. The majority appear to be 11/16. Get a little extension. Better check them with a torque wrench. So I'm adjusting this to 30. It's supposed to be 20 to 30. So this is the cotter pin it comes with. It seems really loose, too small. So I bought a set of cotter pins, and this one, which is quite a bit larger, is really the right size. I'll trim those cotter pins off when I'm done. So this is the big one that came with the idler arm. That one was large enough after all, the original. Same as the bottom of the idler. I kept the original ones. So that'll work out. Now to cut off the excess. Ooh, that's not going to cut very easily. Well, it seems the only way to even this up, left side to right, will be to move the steering wheel and then adjust it so that it's centered more for both sides. It will be off from where I expected it to be, but there's a lot of movement in the steering, so it should be fairly centered, even when it's just a few teeth off. For this amount of space on both sides, I think that's a pretty good centering. Steering wheel is off. And this is the starting point for the steering wheel, when the rest looks centered up out front. So I'll have to readjust that. So I centered the wheels in the front and turned the steering wheel lock to lock. And it's the same number of turns lock to lock because the stops on the bottom of the lower control arms will prevent the turning as many turns as it did when I was first installing the steering box, power steering box. But this is where it should be lined up straight up, and I'm gonna have to pull this hub off and realign it straight up so that the canceling cam works properly with the alignment of the hub. It's done, and it is actually 1 1/4 turns each direction, so 2.5 turns lock to lock, limited by the little stoppers on the bottom of the lower control arms. I'll show you outside, but it's exactly 1 1/4 back to center, and then 1 1/4. So there's more turns available to the power steering pump than is limited by the turning radius of the car, which is limited by these bump stops right here. As this steering turns, it can't go farther. So there's 2 sizes of grease fittings. These ones go on the link ends for the steering, and then the larger one goes on the idler arm. So the end links have 9/32, and then the idler arm has 5/16, which is like 8 millimeters.